Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out as we continue to talk about issues that are of grave concern to not only the city of Winston-Salem, but also to other organizations within the community. Of course, this morning we're talking about the Rolling Hills apartment complex and the issues that we have been aware of for some time out there. These are unacceptable conditions, conditions that you wouldn't want any of your families or others to be involved in. And the purpose of today's event is to really bring the community up to speed on actions that the city has been underway with, as well as to hear from the Ministers' Conference of Winston-Salem and vicinity to address the issues that they've brought to us. With us this morning is Bishop Todd Fulton, who is the chairman of the Winston-Salem Ministers' Conference and vicinity. Reverend Carlisle, who is assistant chairman there. Reverend Omar Dykes, who is the chairman of the Social Action Committee for the Ministers' Conference, and of course, Council Member Derwin Montogmery. Also want to recognize our Mayor Pro Tem, who is here this morning, Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Vivian Burke here on the front row. Councilmember Burke has expressed a lot of concern and interest in this project as well. The city has had a wonderful working relationship with the Ministers' Conference on a number of issues that have come forward, and I think it's that collaborative relationship that has allowed our city to prosper and to really have a strong working arrangement there. We certainly respect the Ministers' Conference and the work that they're doing. They are the conscience of our community in some ways, and they encourage us to do the right thing, and we certainly want to do that. We try to be responsive as we go forward. As you know, the city has been working hard on this apartment area for some time. Back in February, we filed a nuisance abatement complaint against the owners of that particular project, which cited numerous law enforcement issues, numerous housing code violations, and really said it's an area that we're serious about. As the owners don't do what they need to be doing, we're willing to take the legal action to do that. As a result of that, or as part of that, the current owners have, I guess, received offers and actually under contract to sell the housing complex to another owner. In preparation for that, our nuisance abatement order is currently on hold pending the final completion of that sale, and Councilmember Montgomery will talk more about that. Councilmember Montgomery and our staff have spent days, hours and days out there working on those issues for some time, and some progress has been made, but not nearly enough. The regional manager for the Aspen group, which manages those apartments, has been to Winston. He actually called this morning to reinforce again that they are trying to do all they can. We don't believe they're doing enough. We don't believe they're moving fast enough. We've inspected 100 of the 110 units, and Mr. Ritchie Brooks, the head of our Code Enforcement Division, is here if there's specific questions in that regard. But there's been some progress, but not nearly enough. And that's the reason we're here today to talk about the other actions we're doing. It's my pleasure now to turn the press conference over to Reverend Dykes, who is the Social Actions Chair, to speak on behalf of the Ministers' Conference. He'll be followed by Councilmember Montgomery, and then we'll see if there are questions. Mr. Brooks is here with more specific updates on actions. Thank you.
I say good morning to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. It was brought to the Ministers' Conference attention concerning the Rolling Hills apartments that there were some conditions that were hazardous to the residents, especially to the children and to the elderly, those living over there in terms of sewage conditions and everything. The Ministers' Conference decided that it was an action that we needed to give attention to, be intentional on it, and we met with the mayor as well as with Councilmember Montgomery. Some of the things that we've talked about in our meeting was very helpful and informative. We were happy to hear that some of the suggestions that we wanted to bring to the table were already being done, and we appreciate the mayor and council member Montgomery and Mr. Brooks being ahead of the game, and that's one of the things we wanted to share. We also want to make it clear that it is the managing company responsibility, and one of the things that the city has done is gone beyond the call of duty to support. Ministers Conference, we feel that it is our job to be supportive, to build bridges and not walls with the city leaders. It is important for us to make sure that everything is being done to offer better housing for the residents at Rolling Hills. Furthermore, we do call on all leaders of the community, both religious leaders and community leaders, to collaborate and stand with the Ministers Conference, with the Mayor's Office, with city leaders and Councilman Montgomery, as we seek to better the housing conditions for Rolling Hills Apartments. Mr. Montgomery.
Today we're here because there are people in our community, in my neighborhood, who are dealing and living in what I would consider to be atrocious living conditions. Since my time on council, I have fought fervently to work on and rectify what I see as a grave wrong in our community, and that is the extreme distresses and housing conditions in certain parts of our communities and neighborhoods. And that does include Rolling Hills. Today, many have failed to include present and former ownership of Rolling Hills Apartments. And as such, they have failed both morally and fiduciarily. Morally, they have failed in the sense that they have been entrusted with a duty to provide a service to individuals when it comes to housing, and they have failed to do that properly. Fiduciarily, they have been paid by federal government to provide subsidized housing and to do so of quality. And again, I believe that the Aspen Group has failed to do that properly. When you have individuals regularly dealing with sewage backup into their apartments, or locks not working on the front doors, AC units draining in living rooms, mold and mildew from standing water, it is clear that Aspen Group, who currently owns Rolling Hill, has failed as such, and I have no faith and confidence in their true ability to continue to provide the type of housing that is needed for the residents of Rolling Hills Apartment. As stated, as of February this year, upon my request, the city began nuisance abatement actions against the owners of Rolling Hills Apartments. As well, the city has inspected the units on property and have issued repair orders for those apartments. Upon the actual orders being sent, the city will continue to move aggressively when it comes to abatement of those units, and will move swiftly to ensure that the ownership responds effectively. I've also asked staff to give me a response from the time in which we began this conversation over 3 weeks ago, that within 2 weeks to give me a response in reference to how Aspen Group is responding to the city and the city's actions and requests to repair and abate the issues that have been placed there. If in fact the city staff responds and states that the Aspen Group has not and is not doing all that they can, I'm prepared to request that HUD examine the removal of the project-based vouchers that are on the property, and turn those vouchers and turn those project-based dollars into vouchers for individuals who live on the property, or examine an opportunity for a different and new location for project-based vouchers that does not include the current ownership. If in fact the current ownership does sell the property to a new owner, I will continue to ask that staff continue to enforce, as these actions have been filed as lease pendants, and they will carry on to any new ownership. If ownership is transferred, these same actions will continue on to any new owner, meaning that if they sell the property, it does not mean that the city has to start this process all over again, but they will be able to continue to enforce these actions consistently and continually. What we face today is the fact that we have a community that does care about making sure that there is affordable housing in our community, but more than that, we want to make sure that the affordable housing that individuals have is livable, and is livable housing in which any one of us in this room would desire to live in. And currently today, that is not what exists in Rolling Hills. And we have a responsibility as a community to ensure that individuals who are in low-income housing, that are in subsidized housing, that are in any type of housing that has any type of support, that it is a quality housing that is provided to individuals in our community. And it also begs the question of whether or not, and it has been asked, of whether or not any investment in the current structure and systems within Rolling Hills will be sufficient to make sure that we're not having this conversation again in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And that is a question that I believe that we must ask very, very clearly, and it will be a question that we ask to any new owner. And if, in fact, that new ownership does not intend to make the proper investment in this project, then myself and I will ask my colleagues on council to withdraw any support for that project unless it ensures the fact that the quality of housing that is invested will be housing that is of high standard and of high quality for the individuals in this community. And at the end of the day, nothing that we say today, nothing that we say at a press conference, nothing that we do today changes the fact that individuals have had to live in these conditions, that they have been relegated oftentimes to feeling as though individuals do not care. They have been chastised by individuals in management and have been dealt with in ways in which none of us in this room would even future to think that we would be dealt with in terms of people who are providing the service to us. It is incumbent upon us as a community to make sure that the residents of Rolling Hills understand and know that they are not by themselves and that the Aspen group will be held accountable and any new ownership will be held accountable. And we will ensure that if that is the case, if there are new owners, that they are held to the highest standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. You've heard a number of initiatives that we have underway. Some are a little more long-term than others, but I did want to emphasize that the city has not been sitting by and letting people stay in unhealthy, unsafe conditions. In fact, we on our own have issued emergency relocation for a number of residents there at our own cost. We'll be seeking, hopefully, to get that reimbursed by the owners, but if we don't, that's not material to us. We wanted to take action to get folks out of untenable living conditions as quickly as possible. So we're happy that you came today. We'll be happy to respond to questions. I might ask Ritchie Brooks to come on up here if there's some specific questions about numbers of units and things of that nature. Reverend Dykes will respond on behalf of the Ministers Conference, and of course Councilmember Montgomery and I are available. So anybody have questions? I know Bill McNeil's can't wait.
Yes, sir. Could you please tell us why you called this news conference today? Is there some particular element, some action? What is happening today? We've heard you tell us that the situation is not improved enough to your satisfaction. So what is the point today? Why did you call us here?
I think what, and I'll let the Ministers Conference speak for themselves, but I think there have been a number of community groups have contacted the Ministers Conference. And we wanted today to let the public know what has been done and is being done on a continuing basis. We want to emphasize the fact that the city is not just sitting by and letting these untenable situations occur. But Reverend Dykes, would you like to comment on that as well?
One of the concerns that we had as the Ministers Conference is that, as the mayor said, the public knows that some initiatives have been taken, and that the Ministers Conference, often known as the voice for the voiceless, that it was important for us to let the public know that matters have been looked into and that the Ministers Conference stands with the city in addressing the issues.
You said you had emergency funds that help people move to new locations. I'm wondering how many people are still living in this situation? And is this an unhealthy? Is it just a floor? What is the condition there under your own thoughts on this?
Ritchie Brooks.
Currently, we have inspected a number of the units at the complex, and I might add that prior to this incident occurring 2 weeks ago, the city had inspected 206 units before, as I said, this incident had occurred, and had already identified a number of unfit violations, and the code enforcement process had already started. Since this incident occurred 2 weeks ago, we have again inspected 110 units, and there are 110 units at the complex. That 110 would be some units have been inspected more than once. The types of violations that we are finding include inoperable smoke detectors, plumbing problems, sewage leaking in many apartments, some more severe than others, water leaking from apartments at the top coming down to the bottom, and infestations. So there are multiple unfit violations. The emergency relocations that were referred to are when we find conditions that present an immediate threat to the continued occupancy of someone, we try to remove them out of that condition right away. So there are several individuals that we're currently working with who we believe meet that criteria. Some have sewage leaks that are very bad. There are some serious electrical problems, and some units are occupied with children that have some medical problems. So those are the ones that we're trying to relocate immediately out of the complex into a temporary, more livable condition. When that's done, in most cases, we try to follow the code enforcement process, which would allow the city to recoup the cost of that temporary relocation. However, where we find that that's not always the case and there are situations that just require folks to be moved, we are moving them regardless of whether or not we believe we'll be able to recoup those funds or not, because the primary concern is to get individuals out of those dangerous or hazardous conditions. So I hope that addresses your question.
Has anyone been removed under this emergency relocation? Has anyone been moved?
Yeah, yes.
How many?
I think we moved 2 and are currently working with 4.
How many do you believe are under this situation that meets your criteria for the emergency relocation?
Currently, to my knowledge, there are approximately 6 or 7 that meet that criteria. That was prior to a meeting that we had out there last night. There was a meeting there last night, and I was approached by several other residents who believe that they have conditions that might warrant that, and we committed to be back out there today to look at those units to see if they meet that criteria.
And you mentioned infestations. Can you just give some specifics on that? What sort of infestation?
But before we just really quickly, in terms of the relocation components that have taken place, part of the action that have taken place with the relocation in partnership with the Housing Authority has stepped forward and has offered a handful of portable vouchers that will be used in the most extreme cases of individuals to be able to have them permanently relocated, meaning that under the current process, when individuals are relocated, the owners have the responsibility to address and abate the violations of the housing code, and that person is able to move back into that actual unit. With the most severe individuals, we'll be using the portable vouchers to permanently remove those individuals out of the property into some other suitable housing, and so that they're not having to go back to the property altogether.
Can I ask about the speed of this process before you move on? You said you issued an abatement, a nuisance abatement back in February, meaning that the situation had reached a pretty sad point at that point. We're 5 months later and no one has been removed from the property. I'm wondering if you gentlemen are satisfied with the speed in which you're addressing this problem.
Yeah. There's almost 2 separate issues, Bill. The nuisance abatement has to do with really the closing down or creating or fixing the problem, basically. The owners have responded in court and have said to the court that they're going to do everything they can to get it up to speed. When the issue of the complex being sold came forward to the court, and they said to the courts, we're going to sell this, the court stayed the enforcement of that and pending the sale of it. And so what we're saying, and Councilmember Montgomery said very clearly, is that unless actions are taken now, then we're going to, as a city, ask our city council to look at other issues to back away our support for that sale. So we're trying again to add all the tactics that we can come up with to get the current owners to bring it up to code. The other thing that Mr. Brooks did not mention is that as we continue to push the enforcement, we're getting to a point where there'll be fines levied on the units that are occupied that are still not up to code. There may be code violations that are not threatening the health and safety of an individual, but they're code violations nonetheless. And those would be $350 per unit for the first day and then $100 per unit per day thereafter. So again, we're trying to come at it in several different ways.
That hasn't happened yet, though.
They haven't got to that point with this last set of arrangements. So have about a 10-day period to comply for the hearing, and then there'll be a period after that. But this gentleman had a question about infestation.
Yes, before moving to that, the code process requires that the owners are given proper notice Generally, that notification period is no less than 10, no more than 30. We've used the 10-day notification process to notify the owners. After that notification, there is a hearing. And at the hearing, it's an opportunity for the owner to show cause why the unit should not be declared unfit for human habitation. Following that, there's an issuance of an order. That order is to repair or vacate or could be to demolish. Generally, in a multifamily unit, demolition gets to be problematic unless you have all of the units under that demolition order. We want to move very cautiously, however, because it's a repair or vacate order. So the owner can actually comply with the order by repairing or vacating the unit. In this particular instance, we certainly don't want vacating to be an option used to satisfy the code, but rather one that is used to encourage the owner to repair the units, and that's the reason you have the civil penalty fines that we generally find in most cases is a huge inducement for the owner to move swiftly. And from what they have indicated to us, they are attempting to do that. However, on re-inspections, we're finding that the quality of the work is such that it is not meeting code standards. So we have re-inspected some units, and they still have not passed the code. The question regarding infestation, there have been multiple instances of roach infestation. So that's generally the type of infestation we are confronted with. You have roaches, and in some instances, there have been reported bed bugs.
Reverend Dykes had a comment as well.
To speak to the time frame, we, as the Ministers' Conference, are not satisfied with the time. That is one of the reasons why we offer our prophetic voice to hold those responsible accountable. However, we are satisfied with the efforts that the city has offered.
Are we currently in that 10-day period hold right now, or are you still waiting for the sale to go through?
No.
Well, I think you need to look at it from two perspectives. There was a period prior to 2 weeks ago. Those units that were inspected, they have gone through the hearing and the order process, and now they're in that period of time given the property owner to make the repairs. If they're not repaired within that time frame, that's when the civil penalty would start. I believe on that was the 206 units that had been inspected prior to the June 14th date. The inspections from the June 14th date, the hearing notices have been issued. So we're in that period now where we're waiting to have the hearing. So the hearing will be held on those units, and of the 110 units that were inspected this second round, there were 97 units found to have violations. So there should be 97 hearings held as a result of those inspections. And the hearings are, we're required to notify the owner and all parties of interest, so the owner and the tenants receive copies of both the hearings and the hearings, and will get copies of the orders. And from the visit last night, from every indication, there are several of the tenants that indicated they would be present at the hearing.
And that first, when was that 10 days exactly up?
I can't tell you exactly, but they were sent last week, so we're probably in about the last 5-day period. So it should be the middle to the latter part of next week.
I'm not quite clear. How many units altogether? Were there 2 ways of inspections?
There were 110 units, and there are 110 units. The 200 units were inspections that had been conducted over the period of January 2014, and I apologize for not stating the period. Those were inspections conducted between the period of January 2014 through June 2016. So there were inspections that were ongoing prior to the incident that caused this last wave of inspections, which occurred on January 14th. Since January 14th, we have gone back out to the units and inspected 110, which resulted in 97 of those units being found with violations.
110 total.
Yes, 110.
Inspections means more than one inspection.
Yes, more than one inspection.
June 14th.
June 14th, I apologize.
Before we move on, I want to ask Councilmember Burke, her ward is just adjacent to this. You've been closely watching. Would you like to make a comment, Councilmember Burke?
Good morning, thank you. It's so sad when we look at this city and we look at this situation and we're not making us, the mayor pro tem, council people, especially the city manager, accountable. As a woman, as a mother, to think about our children who are sleeping, eating sewage. You're talking about this particular case, but I have something similar. When we look at the New Hope Manor, it is the same way. And I will be challenging this city staff, to come up with something so we wouldn't have to stand here and have these kind of conversations. This is just a tip of what we ought to be looking at. I said to the city manager the other day, enough is enough. How much more? I feel that when we come here, and I appreciate the ministers, I'm in everybody's church. I talk to all of you. But to come here when we have cases like this, we need you more than just this case. We need to know that our ministers are standing with the poor people, the deprived people, people living in poverty, not just for Rolling Hills. This is not the first situation we've had. So this city manager should be coming up with his staff on recommendations of what we will do not to have this kind of situation again. And Mayor, that should be the challenge for you to say, and as you, as council people, we challenge this city staff not to come and tell us about the problems, but to come and tell us how we're really going to correct the problems of poor people in this community. I know you'll hear about Rolling Hills, and as the mayor said, it is close to the Northeast Ward, what's happening. But I've said to the city manager, and I believe we're coming up with a plan, we have ignored east of 52. And if you look at the problems, you ministers, they're in a particular area where east of 52. But we can take finances, and I said to the city manager this morning, we can take our tax dollars of poor people, other people, and we put these dollars in other places, we're going to have to do more in taking care of the poor in the city of Winston-Salem. You and your staff need to get up, get out, and don't come at short-term things like this with this broken mess that we're in. And we're in a mess. I want you to know that. I invite you, as I said to the city manager, we have 2 Winston-Salems. There are areas that I can invite you to go and look at and see. And as a woman, as a mother, to have people living and sleeping in sewage, draining down, and these babies crawling on floors, and people laying on their clothes, taking their clothes to soak up. Have you all seen it in some of the units? How they're taking their clothes to soak up the sewage that's falling down in there, and how they have to walk around. And up under that carpet that they have pulled up, you have concrete slab. So I'll say to the mayor, as mayor of this city, and I feel just as much as a part of what we're not doing, that we ought to be doing. And I would challenge the taxpayers to say to the city manager, tell us how many of our dollars we've spent working with business people who come in here. Some come and do a good job with housing, some come and do a poor job with housing. And I'm just as concerned about the northeast, the southeast, the northwest, and the west of this community.
Thank you, Councilmember Burke. Certainly, Councilmember Montgomery wanted to comment on one aspect of this as well.
Just wanted to make sure there was clarity in the point that was raised around the nuisance abatement action and then the housing code enforcement components, that the nuisance abatement action that was taken in February of this year, that is the only action that is on hold. That is the only action that is on hold that has been given a stay that expires in November of this year in the court. And so that is directly associated in which the nuisance and abatement action that was taken in February. All of the housing type violations that have been cited are items that are not on hold and that will not be placed on hold regardless of any sale or transaction that will carry over with any transaction with any sale, which will mean that it will not stop the city from enforcing any of those actions. So those two pieces are separate, and want to make sure that public understands that although that one is on hold, all of the housing code sides will be able to be moved forward with.
Derwin, can you tell us about the sale itself? Is there somebody right there waiting to go? What's the status?
Yes, there is an individual who has come forward in reference to that. They have applied for the state's low-income tax credit process in order to have additional dollars to invest in the property. And as a part of that, you may recall about a month or so ago, maybe a little more than a month or so ago, 2 months ago, they came before City Council because a part of that requirement is that the local government must also agree in saying that they support the action taking place for the application for the low-income tax credits. And so they did come with that, and they did come with a proposal to make a multi-million-dollar investment in the property. But again, it comes to the question of whether or not that's going to be enough to really transition the property into what it needs to be so that it does increase the life of the property, so we're not having the same conversations. And the expectation for closure of that is August of this year, with an anticipation of any construction or work to take place within the next 2 to 3 months after that. So again, for the real actions in terms of actual full-fledged construction and renovation of property, if there is a sale to take place, we're looking at late this year before any of that actually would be able to happen if it moves forward.
And then once you get started on renovation, it sounds like you have to move people out.
And I will leave that to the Steele Group, who are the individuals who are particularly purchasing the property. But as they have stated to council, and they stated as standing before this day is here before council, that their anticipation of how they would do the actual renovations were not to permanently displace individuals out of property, but to do in-place renovations. And if there were things that caused individuals to have to be removed out of the unit, that they would take on full costs for having individuals displaced at that time. But again, I think there's some more evaluation to be done on the total extent of what those renovations will be.
Mr. Brooks, you had a clarification?
Yes, and not necessarily a clarification, but I did want to just make you aware that with regards to the comments made by Mayor Pro Tem Burke, based on the law, we are somewhat limited in our ability to be proactive in doing our code inspections. However, for future problem properties, and there are other problem properties, we intend to contact the owner or the occupant and request permission to inspect. We're also looking at conducting periodic inspections of a targeted effort to respond to blighted or potentially blighted conditions, but all in accordance to state law. And I think it's very important that that's emphasized. We will inspect based on our authority that's granted through state law, but we do intend to be as proactive with this as we have the authority to be.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. And let me just emphasize that. I think the thing you've got to keep in mind is that in the past 2.5 years, these apartments have been inspected about 3 times each. If you think about the 200 before this and now 100 now, so over 300 inspections. So I think we've been pushing as hard as we can. It's obviously not doing the job we want, and that's the reason we took the next step, which was the nuisance abatement actions that we did back in February. So we'll continue to push hard on that. Reverend Carlisle wanted to talk about a service that the Ministers' Conference could offer.
The conference is aware that many of the residents there in Rolling Hills have been in a situation where they had to use bedding and other items to help restrain some of the some of the sewage and so forth that was in the unit. I wanted to give our number is 336-422-6066, which is a number that has been made available. A number of churches in the community have come together to make funding available for those that are in need of having bedding and so forth replaced. And so I wanted to make the community aware that we were aware of that situation, have made provisions to make sure that those that are in need do have an outlet to have some of those personal items, linens, and so forth replaced.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll be around if anybody wants to do individual interviews. But I think the message we'd like for you to take away today is that we're together, the Ministers' Conference, the city, and others to address this. Mr. Ike Howard is with the NAACP here, local chapter, the president of that, and we're glad to have you here, Mr. Howard. So thank you all for coming.